I feel like a framework is really important to have to set the guardrails.
Yep.
What is that framework that you've been working on?
We try very hard to do what we say we're going to do, and I think that builds confidence.
Your dreams get bigger, but it's because you've been learning constantly, and I think that is really important.
Marketers out there, we really just have to be focused on being great at communication, kind of owning our stuff. What are we doing, and how does it roll up to the strategy? That's one of the key pieces, and then communication. Hey, what's up, everybody? Josh Becerra here with my man Shinhee Son. You know, you've seen me doing how I work videos for a long time. Here at Agurian, we're going to try something new. We're switching it up a little bit. We're going to the Small But Mighty Marketing Podcast. That's what this is going to be called from now on. Small But Mighty Marketing Podcast. It's a little bit of an evolution, right? So Shin, you and I worked pretty heavily with a fractional CMO over Q4, what was it, 2023, I guess? So pretty recently. And that kind of helped us evolve into this idea of small but mighty marketing team. So anyway, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your role here at Agurian, and then we'll get into it.
Yeah, well, I've been leading growth here, so really on the marketing side of Agurian since the beginning of the year. But like Josh was mentioning, was working through the marketing planning, like how do we reach the people that we want to reach? And it really crystallized into who is that person or who is that audience? What is the type of content we need to produce and in what format? And so that's why I'm really excited about us creating this podcast, because I think it really does give us another perspective, you another perspective. We're able to kind of talk in a different way as well. So I think you guys will also really enjoy that.
Well, and one of the kind of hard things, just to be honest, is getting guests to show up all the time so that we could have consistent content was always a little bit difficult. So, you know, Shin and I, we work together every day. So it's going to be a lot easier for us to be a little more consistent. But hopefully you'll still get the same amount of value out of what we talk about here. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of small but mighty. So we did this work with our fractional CMO, Veronica from Authentic. Let's go, Veronica. Shout out. Yeah. And one of the things that came out was our very best clients, the people that we feel like we can make the most impact on and that get the best results, are those that are in companies of like 10, 20 million to 150 million in revenue, but they have really small marketing teams, like literally 2 or 3 people in the marketing function, which is crazy because they run around with their hair on fire. This might resonate with some of you, right? You're in charge of the website and the digital marketing, the SEO, all the things, but you're also in charge of branding and messaging. You're in charge of like trade shows, I don't know, email marketing. It's just like a lot. And so I think what we found doing some of our research was, man, if we can just show up for those people and like take paid media, organic search, analytics kind of off their plate so they can focus on some of those other things and they can trust us to like do amazing work, get the results that they need, and honestly make them look good within their organizations. Like those are our people. So that's why we call them small but mighty marketing teams. And that's why this is moving from the How I Work podcast to the Small But Mighty Marketing Podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, we talk with a lot of different, ICPs, ideal client personas, and so, or profiles, and we have learned, there's a lot of things that marketing directors or senior level marketing leaders are trying to accomplish, but they're just always held back,
super
because
tough.
You've got to do all the things that Josh was talking about. And so that's where I feel like a framework is really important to have, to set the guardrails, to give you some structure. And I know we've got a structure that we've been building. I know you've been working on it quite a bit. For sure. There's patterns that you've been noticing. What is that framework that you've been working on?
Awesome. So, at Agurian, our tagline is have confidence. Shin appropriately wearing the shirt today.
There you go.
So have confidence. We call it our confidence framework. And basically it's centered around confidence in the middle, but you really need there's 4 kind of attributes to a organization or a leader that's operating with confidence in their digital. So the first one of those things is their strategy, right? So you need to have a good strategy. You need to be aligned on strategy. So leaders up and down the organization, all the stakeholders have to actually like be aligned on that strategy. So that's the first key component to like having confidence. The second is like process. In my experience, I've found that like by having a great process that you can rely on, it's easy to like, it facilitates communication, which is another one of the pillars we'll get to in a minute. It facilitates that communication. So let's say that you have a strategy, you've aligned on it, and you say, okay, this is what we're gonna do over the next 3 months to try to execute on this strategy. Well, you gotta have that documented somewhere. You gotta have a process for how you're gonna actually execute on those things, so that when other stuff comes up, which inevitably it does, you can go back to your process and say, well, this is where we are in our process. And what you're asking me to do is kind of like shift resources or change. So do we really want to make that change, or do we not want to make that change today? And if yes, indeed, we do need to make that change, well, then the process should dictate, well, what are we taking off of the table and in order to have enough space to put this new thing on the table. So process is the second. Third is data, right? So good data hygiene, a trusted source of truth, numbers that not only you can count on, but that actually give you insights into what's working and what's not working. So that's the third kind of key pillar to the confidence framework. And then the last one is communication. So, and I think this is like one of the biggest ones. We were just at a lunch yesterday, and we heard from the person we were talking with about how like communicating to leaders up and down the chain and other stakeholders, like that's where like a lot of the rub happens. And so communication is key. I don't know if you took anything else from that lunch or about communication.
No, I feel like communication is what binds all of those other, like the other components of that framework together.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got great data, but you need to be able to share that information or connect the dots in that way. You also have strategy. I mean, if you just have all the thoughts and ideas in your head and not sharing it with your stakeholders or even with your team, then what good does it do?
Right.
They don't know where you're trying to go and how you're trying to direct your marketing resources. And then you have your process, right? And so these are the processes, the things that you're doing in order to accomplish those goals or to act on that strategy. And so you need a lot of that communication quite frequently. And that was something that I actually learned quite a bit in that conversation. Was it's not just about these key points. You know, for example, it's that maybe it's a shareholder meeting that you're preparing for, or maybe it's the monthly updates or quarterly updates that you're doing. It's really all the things that you have to do in preparation for those that is also really important. So that was a big takeaway for me. And why I feel like this framework does really connect all those dots. And I think also communication is what make all of those things end up working.
So I feel like, if you're really good at getting your strategy aligned, you have a process that the entire organization understands, you got great data that is a trusted source of truth that's shared across the organization, and you're good at communication, you're going to have that confidence. So that's what we talk about when we talk about having confidence in your digital. We have to help our clients like build themselves up in those 4 key areas. Now, the other key thing that we also talk about a lot with our clients is this idea of what's your mindset or approach to like the information that you're receiving, right? So like the insights that you are getting from this data, like how are you reacting to that? And that's where I talk a lot about you got to build a learning organization, right? So I'm just kind of tired of seeing companies that operate as like KPI chasing, kind of like ride or die. These are our KPIs. If we don't hit them, then like, you know, blow up the marketing team, all the initiatives, bring in a new CMO. Like, I feel like there's organizations that are always chasing KPIs, and then there's organizations that are learning organizations. And I fall on the side of like building a learning organization. If you've been to the doctor, of course, right? If you ever go to the doctor and you're in pain, they'll give you like that scale where on one side it's like a red face that's just like crying and it's like the worst pain you've ever felt. And on the other side is like a green happy face. You've seen this before?
I have seen those.
Okay, So I know, bear with me. I use a lot of metaphors. So what's funny about that scale is if you show up to like the office of the CEO and you say, hey, we didn't hit 100% of our KPIs. We hit about 70% of them. But here's what we learned about our customer. Here's what we learned about our product. here's what we learned about our competition. Here's what we learned about the messaging and what's resonating in the marketplace. Like, while that's not going to be like, yay, no pain at all, it's also not going to be like dark red, crying, oh, this is the worst information ever. And so I would argue that if you show up to that same CEO's office and you say to them, hey, we hit 100% of our KPIs, and they're like, yeah, high five, let's go. How'd you do it? And you're like, well, I don't really know because we were running a couple of different things and we had that launch that kind of overlapped with the other thing. And like, that is not going to inspire confidence. And I believe that you're going to be further down on that like kind of pain scale than you were when you only hit 70% of your KPIs. So that's why, like, huge advocate for building a learning organization.
Yeah, my take on that is, I do think KPIs have a place, right?
Yeah, of course.
They are those the milestones where you get to celebrate, or you're making progress. There's all those sayings like enjoy the journey, or what's that one where it's you teach them how to fish and they can fish forever, something like that. And so what you learn ends up usually, outlasting the KPIs and the goals that you've set, right?
Right.
They're tied to a time.
Yeah.
But what you learn is not. It compounds, and then now you're able to do what I think is the most important thing, which is to be able to reproduce the results.
Right.
And so there's that, and then there's also this feeling of being centered. And when you're confident, it usually means is because you've gone through the thing that you used to be afraid of, or you knew you couldn't do.
Yeah.
And now you can go fish now. You can go deep sea fishing or something. But if it's your first time, you're obviously not going to be confident. But if you've gone many times, now you're thinking, well, how do I catch a different type of fish? Like, how do I catch a bigger fish? Like, your dreams get bigger, but it's because you've been learning constantly. And I think that is really important in any organization. Yeah,
and like on the inverse, I've heard stories where like the CFO shows up and says, hey, we want 20% growth in the company in the next year. And so you need 20% growth in your organic search traffic. And they like mandate that to the marketing team. Yeah. And then the marketing team's just like, well, what if I told you I could get 20% growth without getting 20% growth in organic traffic? Like, those two things don't actually correlate all the time. And there's almost like no, that's your KPI, go hit it. And those are like the disconnects in mindset that I'm talking about that like really get companies in trouble. And then you're seeing like this vast turnover in the marketing function where you're losing kind of all those learnings, right? So like somebody might spend 3 years and they might have all these insights that they like really understand. Okay, here's our next best step. And then it's like you're out, and then the new person comes in, and it's going to take them a ton of time to even get to that place. So anyway, huge advocate for learning organizations.
I mean, it is what those vanity metrics are. I think about those in that kind of environment where you've hit your goals, and the business might look at it, and they're looking at their bottom line. But the goal were these vanity metrics, and you hit it, and they might be thinking, well, where's the results?
Yeah.
And so that's where, when you're so focused on the metrics and potentially the wrong metrics, I mean, you're really setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
And also, I think about if you're just really gunning just for the metrics, you may end up cutting corners.
Yeah.
You may be doing things a little bit more rushed, and all of a sudden you're sitting on a house of cards type of thing.
Right.
Which it's because you didn't learn anything, and now you just threw money at a problem potentially. You again took shortcuts, and now you want your team to reproduce it. They're not going to be it's a recipe for disaster, I think.
For sure. Yeah, I'm just a big advocate for building learning organizations. I feel like that's why that communication piece is so like vital.
Yeah.
Because like if you can't communicate like how you're doing your work, why you're doing your work, what you're taking from the data, and how that's informing your next best step, then like you don't have that shared mindset. And that's where I see companies getting into trouble all the time. So, marketers out there, we really just have to be focused on being great at communication, kind of owning our stuff, our area of expertise, and really trying to like build that shared mindset around like, hey, this is about learning. It's not only about hitting, that one key metric.
So what would be a great way to learn? Like, how do you foster that type of organization?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like some of the things that I've had experience doing is when you have a CEO or a leader like, hey, we've got this bright, shiny object, or like, we need to go in this direction. Or they even can show up and say like, I think the image on the homepage is wrong. Or I think that what we say, like the headline, the H1 on the homepage is not right. And I wanted to say this. Or I saw our competitor doing this thing. They're like using this channel or this platform. Like we need to, take all of what we're doing and move it over to whatever, LinkedIn, because I saw our competitor doing it and we need to do that. Well, like the way that I always approach that and the way that I try to like instill that learning mindset is by just saying, great, you know what, we can test that, right? And so it is like leaning back on our experimentation, on our kind of conversion rate optimization tools.
Yeah.
Because as soon as you like start saying, hey, great, we actually took that image that you wanted on the website versus the image that was on the website, and we ran an A/B test for 3 months, and we ran all the traffic, and this is the result of that test. And guess what? Like, you're wrong, right? And we tested it. So like, it's a way for you to be responsive to leaders who maybe be wanting to run in one direction or another, while like instilling this mindset of testing. Because nobody is going to once the data is presented, and they very well could have also been right, in which case you give them a high five and say, hey, great idea. Like, we tested it and you're right. That new copy is really working a lot better from a conversion rate standpoint. So I feel like that's a tool that I've seen work.
Yeah, I mean, the clarity that you get from a test result it really does change the game.
Yeah.
When you have an intuition or a feeling, and then all of a sudden you have a number that actually either affirms it or is counter to it, you can carry that into all these other follow-up tests. And so now people also start to get excited, because now it's like, okay, I'm not just, licking my finger and, putting in the wind. You're measuring it, and now you can point it in a direction. You become more precise. And when you become more precise, that is an outcome of being confident, right? Because okay, if I do this, I'm probably going to get this type of result because of all these tests that you have. So now imagine your whole marketing team, or whether it's your in-house marketing team or you're working with an agency or a consultant. I mean, that is in our opinion, a key component to have in a partner, because it does transform you into a learning organization. You're not running around with your head chopped off. And so therefore you inherit some of that confidence, and now you'll start feeling that when you go into your meetings and you're pitching or you're talking about the results. You can actually confidently say it's because of this, or it's because of these things, and this is what we learned. And usually I find that C-level or the higher up you go, that level of insight is something they can get.
Right. Well, this conversation is reminding me, at that same lunch, you had mentioned, and this is another kind of way to think about how do you address some of this stuff that's kind of coming at you from different places, trying to pull you away from the plan or the work that you have. You were talking about how earlier in your experience, you would jump when somebody said hey, I want to do this, I want to try this thing. You would just jump and spend 10, 20 hours dissecting it so that you could get them their answer. And I thought it was funny how you said you learned to just ask them so how important is this to you, right? And they might just, it was just kind of a curiosity of mine. So do you want to just talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, not that I wanted to throw up after I realized how much time I spent doing this. It was because, early on in my career, I was just trying to get recognition. I was trying to prove to myself and to others, hey, I know what I'm doing. And so every request that I got from a client or every request that I got from a peer, I treated it like they were all the highest priority item, And so came up on the top of my list, and all of a sudden I got several others, and now I'm spending all this time researching, figuring it out, presenting it in the right way, and then I would send it to them, and they would say, "Oh, thanks."
Yeah.
I spent all these hours, and then I just
I'm
kept
sure it was
getting,
awesome.
yeah, I mean,
But-
I'm sure it was. I hope it was at least. But no, it was really eye-opening because
When you started asking them, like,
yeah,
how important is this?
exactly. And then I realized majority of the requests that I have gotten, it was more out of curiosity and maybe just to kind of learn something, but it just really wasn't urgent.
Yeah.
And what actually the thing that caused it was that my priorities were just smashed.
Yeah.
Like the things I needed to do started to kind of hinder, it started to stress me out. I had to spend a lot more hours, trying to get everything done. And so that was, ask is a big, big learn in my career.
Yeah, you just got to ask, like, how big of a priority is this? And that's part of like relying on a process too.
Yeah.
So if you have a process and it's clearly articulated and we've aligned on these goals, and then somebody shows up and says, hey, I want to know about this, you can say, great, like, how big of a priority is that? Is it more of a priority than the goals we've previously set and agreed on? If so, let's talk about the trade-offs. Maybe you have an opinion about why it shouldn't be prioritized, but it gives you that opportunity to have that conversation, which I think, now we know.
Yeah.
Now we know to ask that very simple question, like, how important is this? Is this a key priority? We've got other priorities. Do we need to reshuffle the deck? Those are the things that I think as marketers, if we can just do a better job at, we're going to build a learning organization. We're going to kind of take back some of our power and feel confident in the work that we do.
So you go and you have a lot of conversations with a lot of different marketing leaders, business owners, and within that framework, the data, the strategy, the communication, the process, is there something you're seeing in terms of what a lot of them are experiencing? Is it really evenly spread out? Like, what's been your perspective on that from all those conversations?
Yeah, I feel like at least where we at Agurian are excel and have put a lot of focus at, because of like these conversations, is around process and around communication. So process in the sense that, we understand and our clients understand what we're working on at all times, who's working on it, and if they're on track or off track on those commitments. And so what that allows for is a high degree of transparency and accountability. And so like in a lot of the conversations that I have, people are showing up and saying like, I don't even know what they're doing, on my account, or I don't understand why they're doing the things that they're doing. And so that is partial communication, but it's also partial transparency. There's our industry is kind of weird in that there are certain actors that are out there like pretending that SEO is some like, I don't know, wizardry or like black box that's behind the curtain, right? Like the Wizard of Oz. Nobody can understand it. And I think what we do is we like pull back the curtain, help people understand we said we wanted to see this type of growth in our organic traffic. So we're going to take on these SEO initiatives in this first quarter. In order to achieve those initiatives, we got to break those down in the monthly kind of tasks. And then those tasks can be broken down even further into sprints. And now we've got like a sprint cadence that our clients can understand. They know who's working on what and when, and if they're getting it done. And so, I feel like, to answer your question, like process and bringing clients along so that they actually understand like what are we doing and how does it roll up to the strategy. That's one of the key pieces. And then communication. Like communication is huge, right? I just was on a call where someone just said like somebody that their vendor would like commit, like, I'll get that back to you by the end of this week. And then they would have to follow up like 12, 14 days later and say like, hey, you said you were going to get that to me like a week ago. Like, what's going on? So again, that's like where people start to lack confidence, right? Is because you don't actually do what you say you're going to do. So, we try very hard to do what we say we're going to do. And I think that builds confidence. And then we just have a really clear, transparent process that delivers a ton of accountability. So that's how we're solving it.
Yeah, I mean, the process really, the improvement, I mean, I think a process gets created from learning.
Yeah.
You end up learning that, oh, that was a bad mistake.
Yeah.
How do I avoid that mistake again? And so you end up writing a SOP, or you end up writing steps or criteria to not go through that same thing again. And is that something that you are also hearing? Maybe there's not a lot of testing being done, or it is because they're just not learning and therefore they're just stuck at the strategy and they need help with actually making it come to life.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that the other piece of it is like insights. So, I have this little thing that I always say that reports is different or not the same as reporting, right? So a lot of times I also hear that like we get these reports from our vendor and I don't know what to make of it. Like I don't understand what I should be paying attention to. There's green arrows pointing up and red arrows pointing down. There's a bunch of different data in there, and it's like what's important in here. And so I think insights is another huge component to that. So it's like you really, not only do you have to have like a process, but then as part of your process, you need to like digest what it is that you're seeing. Why are you placing importance on certain things and not on others? And then how are those things driving recommendations? So like insights, I think, is another like key component to this. I hear a lot where clients or prospective clients show up and say like, I'm the one driving the ship all the time. I show up to our meetings and I say, hey, should we be doing this thing in this platform? Or should we try this type of ad campaign? And their expectation really is that the vendor partner is the one who's the expert, and they're the ones who should be showing up with the thought leadership and saying like, hey, like there's this new campaign type. It's really performing well with our this other client type, and we want to try it with you, and here's how much budget we want to put behind it, and here's how we could see it working. Like that level of thought leadership that your agency partner needs to be bringing. You shouldn't be the one as a marketer, in-house marketer, like showing up and telling them what to do. Otherwise you have a really high priced order taker, and nobody likes to pay for that.
Yeah, that's, I find examples of that even in my own life, and where and in my experience with clients, that they'll share, hey, I read this thing about this headline, and lately it's ChatGPT 4 and it's recent, announcement, or Gemini, and you'll read a headline and you'll think, okay, is that something I need to be worried about? Or is that something that I need to do anything about? And so then I will, share it. I'll ask, or I'll say, oh, this is something that should be done or needs to be done. But really, I feel like it's almost like a symptom of not having someone advising me that knows more about it than I do.
Yeah.
So I end up having to bring in these ideas because I'm worried about it.
Right.
And so having, whether it is an agency partner or in-house team members or your peers, I mean, I do feel like it is important to have someone that is looking at that day to day, because you won't be able to do that. I mean, you've got, again, you might be doing trade shows, you might be doing events, you might be doing conferences,
everything,
and then reporting, maybe doing some of the work, and then you've got to manage the team. There's just so much that you have to do, and I think there's like an important thing to be able to delegate some of that work, some of that mind share, so that you do get those great ideas.
Yeah, that's a great segue. I mean, we're going to be talking a lot about all of these topics and how it is that you can like claw back some of that mind share as a marketer, and how you can get the results that you're going to be held accountable for, but how you can do that with partners, how you can kind of lead an organization. I mean, we've talked about the confidence framework. We've talked about building learning organizations. We talked about a lot of things. So the future of this kind of small but mighty marketing podcast is really that Shin and I are going to sit down and have some of these conversations with you about some of these things that we're seeing, what we're hearing from others. And hopefully it provides a little bit of insight. Maybe we give you some tips and ideas. But either way, we'll make it fun, hopefully. And I hope you enjoyed this first round of the Small But Mighty Marketing Podcast. Thanks, Shin.
Thanks, Josh.
See ya.